A little refresher, the NES Ninja Gaiden series were the first games I reviewed on this channel. They certainly live up to their mantra as one of the hardest game trilogies of all time. That said, it's not always for good reasons. While the first game was great at balancing difficulty and enjoyment, the second and third games seemed to rely on cheapness and mechanical regression to service their hardcore reputation. I did wonder if it's possible for there to be a spiritual successor of this series that takes what the games do best and leave behind its needless technical gaffles. Well, as it appears, there's quite a few games that made such an attempt, but if we're looking at something that captures the vibe more closely, one game comes to mind. Ladies and gents, Cyber Shadow. This neat little hardcore side-scroller happened to just came out last month. I'll admit, it kinda slipped through my mind until someone reminded me of its existence. Now that I know of it and seen enough trailers to get me interested, I figure it's time I give my take on this fresh catch. Cyber Shadow is developed by Mechanical Head Studios and published by Yacht Games, the same powerhouses behind Shovel Knight. Just like how that game is their answer to Mega Man and Zelda 2, Cyber Shadow is their answer to games like Ninja Gaiden, Shadow of the Ninja, and a whole other gallery of ninja games I'm too lazy to name. Despite some clear similarities, the game is definitely more of its own thing, focusing primarily on being a modern take on an 8-bit ninja platformer. I've seen a few written reviews that seem to draw a lot of comparison between this game and its inspirations. So just to be a little less redundant, I'm gonna try to not compare this to Ninja Gaiden too much going forward, lest necessary. First and foremost, let's look at how well this game does on its own. Cyber Shadow stars a cyborg ninja named, what else? Shadow. He's set on a quest to rescue his fallen clanfolk from the subjection to synthetic experiments done by Dr. Progen, the head scientist of Mecha City who's using the synthetic experiments to cure his daughter of a terminal condition. Said daughter also happens to be the master of the clan Shadow is a part of. So not only is Shadow rescuing his people, he's also out to bring salvation to his soulmate. Despite the depth of the character's motives, the plot doesn't get much more complicated than hero traverses obstacles and fights the villain to save someone he holds dear to him. It's pretty much the constant norm even with modern indie games. Still, it gets the job done when the focus is more on the gameplay than anything else. There is still enough prevalent depth to these characters that can keep you interested in what's going on. So at least it's got the substance to keep the narrative engaging. The world design is decently interesting to complement the overall aesthetic of the game. The civilization of Mecha City is technologically advanced, yet there are spiritual influences drawn to keep the life cycle of the world balanced. These spiritual energies came from a realm called the Ethos, a world that exists beyond consciousness where Shadow's clansfolk train to harness their potential as true ninjas. As per with the clan being experimented on, you find your fellow folks across the game being subjected to the harshness of the experiment. Some are barely alive, if at all, and others are already converted to machines. Things don't seem that heavy-hearted until you realize how painful it must be for them to go through these experiments. So yeah, long story short, the world building centers around sci-fi meets spirituality with a shade of darkness to its overall tone. For a game like this, I say it's an ideal setup and honestly something I kinda like to see more games tackle in general. Of course, it's going to need the presentation to really match the overall atmosphere the world gives off. So how well does it handle such a thing? Let's find out. I'm gonna be honest, when it comes to these 8-bit indie games, I don't immediately get hooked in by their looks just because they adapt some retro aesthetics. Shovel Knight, for example, isn't a game you'll find me swooning over its presentation all that much. It is well done, especially for a modern take on 8-bit designs, but it doesn't necessarily draw me to think about it all too often. Even the music hardly stuck around with me all that pleasantly because of how oversaturated the soundbites were. After giving Cyber Shadow a thorough look, however, I think I can see where my tastes lie. Like, yee boy, does this game look and sound fantastic! The construct of the technologically advanced city meshes surprisingly well with the aesthetic of the Ethos realms, which consists of traditional Japanese infrastructure. Not only that, but the animation on the character movements and visual effects really stand out and pushes further on how good you can make 8-bit sprite animations look. The soundtrack also did its job remarkably. The sound design of every attack, movement, and effect really pops out, and the music feels just the right amount of hype. Something I noticed about this game's take on 8-bit music is how well it matches with the cyber environment of the game, given the digital strength it radiates. When it delves into the less mechanical Ethos realms, the soundbites are much softer, complementing the serene, melancholic atmosphere. The cutscenes of this game were drawn in the same vein as the old NES cutscenes, with a fair share of advanced motions added to it. Even with the snips of narration and dialogue, the imagery conveys a show-don't-tell storytelling very nicely. Every image radiates with strength and emotion of the given scenario, and it's fun to be able to put together what goes on by yourself rather than having the game tell you via bloated exposition. All that stuff is mostly left behind data terminals and remnants of the dead, which you can choose to read yourself at any time. So yeah, the game tells a good story, it looks wonderful, and it sounds magnificent. But as much as I value those aspects, those all take second in a game that focuses on shattering your arms 7-way through Sunday. Time for the big bad devil of the shadows to shine. Here comes the gameplay. Before we move forward, let's summarize the common themes surrounding the ninja games of distant past. Ever since Ninja Gaiden, everyone has this expectation that every game of this theme should be ball-bustingly hard. A lot of the classic games seem to follow suit to this. Hell, even the 3D Ninja Gaiden games didn't slow down on that expectation for difficulty whatsoever. Here's the thing though, for as fun as it is to play hard games and earn the satisfaction of completing a harsh feat, there's a fine line which crossing would lead to bad design. Said line being throwing a kick to your face with glitches, poor controls, bad hitbox, cheap enemy spawns, and limited continues. It's the reason I cannot stand Ninja Gaidens 2 and 3. They may achieve what they wanted, but they didn't make it very fair. In Cyber Shadow's case, however, there is none of that. It's exactly what you wanted to see in a modernized side-scroller ninja game. Most of its difficulty comes down to adapting to platforming segments, using enemies and terrain to your advantage, and learning the pattern from each hazard and boss fight. It's a really good hardcore platformer that offers a sizable amount of content while staying true to its mantra in being difficult, but fair. Shadow himself is a really adaptable ninja who obtains more and more upgrades as the game goes on. He does start up a bit on the slow side though, not being able to use every skill and command immediately. All you got is your sword and jumping jacks. You'd think this would make the game a slog as it starts up, but it doesn't. The early levels were designed with just enough intuitiveness that what you initially have is all you need to make decent progress around here. The checkpoint stations in the game can and will heal you, as well as provide you with permanent respawn until you switch to a different one. There are some that will get a little stingy and demand that you pay it some fuel to get recovery and additional items. They shouldn't be a big deal though, as long as you're aware of spending your currencies carefully. Speaking of items, every level in the game offers you different sorts of secondary weapons to use. A lot of them help cover the grounds when it comes to long range attacks or boosts in your sword attacks and spirit regens. They pretty much last with you as long as you don't take too much damage or switch to a different weapon. I can tell that anyone pro enough at this can probably do a weapon solo across the game if they want to. As for upgrades, there's a handful lot of them to find in this game. You obtain new abilities by saving your fellow clanfolk and through meditating in the ethos. Your abilities range from throwing projectiles and enhanced sword techniques to improvements on your movement, which includes climbing, dashing, and double jumping. Most of your new skills are ammunited by spirit points rather than item supply, so you'll pretty much have these skills at all times at the cost of having to recover those points consistently. Other than that, you have collectibles in the form of health and spirit extensions. You get these either from defeating bosses or by uncovering secret passages. You're not going to be able to get all of them in one go, so you're going to be backtracking through some of these levels once you receive enough upgrades. Conveniently, there is a teleporter that can get you to where you need to be, and once you have the upgrades you need, blazing through these older levels will be a breeze, a testament to how strong you become as you progress. So, with all that content covered, let's delve into the structure of the difficulty curve a bit more. This is where I'll be drawing more comparisons with the classic Ninja Gaiden games. When it comes to the old games, you're inevitably gonna make a few mistakes with coding and balancing and such. It's why I'm willing to forgive the original Ninja Gaiden for being glitchy in places, especially given how it still delivered a cohesive, playable package in the end. Now in Cyber Shadow, none of this will be excusable given how the developers have all the time and reference to ensure these glitches don't happen again, and that modern games in general are open to downloadable updates that fix the issues with these games. I actually remember back when Cuphead was first released. It sort of doesn't take into account the key cohesiveness in making a game hard but fair. While the game was still generally beatable, it still has a few glitches and luck-driven elements that make the game a massive chore to complete. I'm looking at you, Calamaria! So as a result, the game did receive an update that cuts down on these glitches and luck-based events, making the experience less douchey. All I can say is thank the 8-bit heavens Cyber Shadow does not fall into that ball pit. As much as the game pushes its precise levels and crowds you with annoying enemies from time to time, it still remembers to be a good game and not shove in glitch or luck elements for cheap shots. When it comes to penalties, it doesn't rely on outdated systems like limited lives or continues. However, it still does have moments where the checkpoints are far apart from each other, particularly in some of the later stages. But again, it doesn't really aggravate me that much. You gotta extend the consequences of difficulty at some point in the game, so this is something I'd have to accept inevitably. It's a different story if the game is shit, but since the game is so well done everywhere else, it's not worth getting angry over. I've seen some complaints that you can't duck in this game, which takes away some flexibility that made the old Ninja Gaiden game so fun. To be honest, I think people really exaggerate this complaint, all because they wanted it to fully capture the Ninja Gaiden experience. The reason why you can't duck in this game is because there are several abilities that require various button inputs, including holding down. The ability in question is Rising Fire, which allows you to attack upwards in a limited range. Honestly, I say getting vertical coverage is good enough compensation for not getting to crouch. Besides, you do get abilities like parry and cross slash to compensate as dodging abilities. And the game encourages mastering these skills as part of its fast-paced progression. If I do have to make one legitimate complaint, it will be the constant drop in frame rate in the last few stages. A lot of that mainly came down to the overlaying weather effect and how much the screen gets crowded with tons of enemies. The drops were relevant enough to cause slowdowns and make the stages persistent in the wrong ways. Now I know you could attribute this to having a good processor to play the game, but I've played Shovel Knight, Hollow Knight, and Cuphead with the same processor on my computer, and they ran mostly fine. So I do hope they fix this soon because the game was so close to being flawless otherwise. And you know what, I'm all for mindless nitpicks sometimes, so let's talk about some other stuff in the game that gets under my skin. First of all, the recoveries you get from the checkpoint stations sometimes require payment as stated earlier. It also drives you to commit to grinding. These recoveries aren't cheap either, so you'll be slicing the same capsules for a while just to get it. And it's not fun. It's not challenging, it just adds meaningless stalling. I can live with not having those secondary weapons, but health recovery isn't something I can just skip, you know? Second, and probably the pettier of the two, the achievements. There are some feats in this game that you can get if you beat the bosses a certain way, like taking no damage or not using any spirit points. And you know what? I'm okay with that. There's nothing wrong with adding some niche challenges to how you play. But, Mechanical Head, real talk here. Why is there no achievement for beating the Combinatron without destroying his hands? That wasn't easy to do, by the way, and I don't even get bragging rights for it. I demand that you fix this! I want my achievement! So that's Cyber Shadow, a retro-style modern platformer aiming for some grueling difficulty, yet manages to accomplish it without any blatant reliance on cheap design. It keeps itself interesting with a plethora of upgrades and items to pick through, absolutely gorgeous presentation, and a story that's straightforward but gritty and nuanced enough to create motivating gravitas. I can't recommend this game enough for anyone who's looking for an awesome game that's both thrilling and challenging to play. My one key advice, however, is to keep an open mind and accept this game for what it is. Expecting this game to fully capture the Ninja Gaiden experience is not really fair, especially since it took inspirations from other ninja games as well. On a side note, it's clear this game is bound to get more updates in the future, judging by some achievements addressing the base gameplay as normal mode. Whenever this game decides to take the difficulty to the next level, I sure hope it takes into account the key points I mentioned when it comes to not resulting to bullcrap mechanics for that hardcore notoriety. An increase in damage output and reduction in upgrades and checkpoints is acceptable so long as it's done to a reasonable degree. Personally, I think what will make a hard mode worth it is stuff like adding more boss attacks and battle phases, assuming that's not too much work. Just as long as the package comes with the right fixes and maintains all which the game does best, it should be smooth shadow dashing from there. Thanks for watching. This is my first time covering a freshly baked indie game, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, consider subscribing for more of my content. With enough support, I might cover more of these in the future. Till then, I bid you all a good day.